So this is John Costa at the Documentary Media Centre, continuing our conversations with three people about our focus on South America. And I'm delighted, Radha and I have known each other for far too long. I'll probably let her tell all the sordid details of how we first met. And you've actually been to Brazil and Mexico, both travelling and working and volunteering. So that's why I thought I'd talk to you, to try and get around that media black hole of South America. It tends to be sort of, trouble, as you said, drugs, cartels, politicians, dodgy elections, all those kind of things. And unfortunately, we never really get to the people. And everyone I've ever spoken to about Latin America, so Central America and South America, they said it's a very different place to travel. I must admit, it's not somewhere I've got to yet. I've done Africa and Southeast Asia and stuff, so it's on my list. But the more people I speak to, it's the people. It's getting down to that level, almost beyond being a tourist and having those conversations. Of course, you've immersed yourself in both tourism, working, and then the volunteering you did around sustainability in Mexico. So let's start with Mexico. You said you went on holiday first.
Yeah, so it was part of a bigger trip. So I did a 5-month trip traveling around the world, and I gave myself 2.5 months to be in Mexico, mainly because it was just a place that fascinated me and I didn't know anything about it. And I love Mexican food, and that's as basic as the rationale was. And I'd been to South America the year before, and so I got a taste of the kind of flavor of the people and the language and everything. But I really wanted to go to Mexico to see beyond the movie stereotype or the media stereotype. And they're the only two frames of reference you generally have with Mexico. It's either kind of like the beaches of Cancun or the drug cartels of Mexico City. And I had my rough guidebook, and I went alone, and I went without any Spanish. So I couldn't speak Spanish, and I had 2.5 months in Mexico on my own, and I planned a trip around. And what I found was, people are so friendly and so outgoing, and they don't mind that you don't speak the language or that you're trying to speak the language. And food and family are at the center of everything in Mexico. And you can eat extremely well for very little. People are very welcoming. And I felt very safe as a woman on my own, traveling around the bus network, the hostel network. I felt safer than I did in some, North and Eastern European countries, because the family and the respect, and there's a bit of a macho kind of male kind of dynamic, but mom and the family always rules first. So as a woman, you're very much cared for, respected, looked after. And two things I traveled around to different cities and different places and stayed in hostels. The problem with staying in hostels is you're still very much with the Australians, the Americans, the fellow Brits, you're still in that bubble, which means you get a experience, but you're still on the outside and you're not within a family, or you don't have that experience. But two things that I did that I'm so glad I had the opportunity to do. One of which was I went to Spanish school in Mexico, in Puebla. And what that gave me was, it was an immersive Spanish school. I'm not rubbish at languages. But what the immersive school did meant you lived with a Mexican family, and they knew you were learning Spanish. And every night you sat at the family kitchen table and you had your dinner with everybody, and you had to practice your Spanish, and you did your homework next to their daughter or their son, who was often doing their English homework. So you'd help them with their homework, and they'd help you with yours. And there's a little 7-year-old loving the fact that you're struggling with the basic verbs of Spanish. But what it meant was you had a number of things. You had the family dynamic. You got fed real home-cooked Mexican food. I went out one evening to see a exhibition and came home late, and the mama absolutely went mad at me in Spanish because I'd worried her. You had that family dynamic. But once I had some language, it opened up so many doors for me to speak to people on buses, in cafes. And so often people extended their friendship and their hospitality to me because I was a woman alone, and they loved the fact that I was learning Spanish. And they were like, can we practice our English with you? And English, not American English. So they loved that. So I was on a bus trip I got on a bus one day to go to a food market that was on, and the bus got stuck in traffic because there was some breakdown. And I got chatting to a girl and her two friends that were on the bus with my very bad Spanish. And we struck up a deal that she would practice her English and I would practice my Spanish. And this bus broke down and never got restarted. So they said, right, you're coming with us. And I spent the afternoon with them and I became one of their gang, and we went and did a whole nother excursion together. But I would have never had that experience without a bit of language.
Yeah. I think that's one of the key things, isn't it? I mean, you know, the conversation I just had with Jason in South America, you know, I think he said he worked, you know, in education and worked for travel guides. And like, so he'd been to like 17 countries of Latin America in total before he got into conflict photography. And he said that's when he was traveling around, it was always on the buses, talking to people. And that's where he found where to go and stuff. And it served him very well. He's very basic Spanish. And traveling on the bus network in Colombia when it came to where the FARC were and where the paramilitaries were and stuff. And I think it's whatever way you get around, you cannot beat talking to local people about local things. And this is the thing. Was it a similar experience when you were in Brazil as well? Were you able to experience it with that level?
Brazil, yes, absolutely. My first 4 or 5 months in South America, because I started in Quito in Ecuador and then worked my way down around. I had the first 4 months with a tour company. And so that was very much kind of like the tourist experience. We were traveling overland. We were literally on a truck, big army truck going across land. So that was a great way to experience just the vastness of the countries. But when I got to Brazil, the tour ended in Rio for Carnival. And I decided to stay another month. And what happened with me staying another month is I had a whole month on my own to do more exploring, and I did a few internal flights to see a bit more of Brazil. And it was very much great to travel on local buses and local transport, because the buses are really cheap and really safe and really easy. And there's often a lot of night buses. A lot of the travelers get the night buses, then you turn up a new day in a new city. But yeah, absolutely, the hospitality and the friendships. And what's really interesting with Brazil is it has such a bad reputation for being unsafe, especially like some parts of central Brazil, like in Rio, Lapa and everything. And I've been in downtown Lapa on my own at 2 o'clock in the morning, and no one's paid me any attention. No one's bothered. I mean, if you were there with a flashy camera and looking very touristy, then potentially, but I was there in old jeans and a t-shirt and no one paid me any attention. And what's really nice is I love those feelings when you knew you weren't a tourist and you didn't stand out. And I love the fact that people didn't pay attention to me, because that's when you really feel that you could be in the middle of something at a cafe or a restaurant and going to the places that are down the back alleys and the side streets. Because you don't want to stand. I don't want to stand out as a tourist. I don't want to be the one that stands out. I want to be able to blend in. And if I've blended in, then I consider that mission accomplished.
I have to totally agree with you. I think I've been some interesting scenarios, particularly in Phnom Penh, with my colleagues there. You'll be sitting there chatting and they'll be like, oh, look at these tourists. And you'll find yourself laughing along. And you suddenly like, God, you know, they're not treating me like that. That's good. We're sitting there having a conversation. We're immersed in conversation. You're not dressed that way. So I agree with you, actually. It's probably real tourism. And I'm not sure whether those times will ever come back, but I certainly hope that now people, when they go, they will take more time and maybe travel overland to get places. I mean, it's a bit far to go there, I know, but once you're there, maybe people will take more opportunity to not fly and do that. So you've mentioned Ecuador, and we've mentioned Mexico and Brazil. And when we first met at DMU, I was coming along about a project that I was involved in, which was about recycling containers for buildings and stuff. And you were doing were you doing product design?
I was doing design management
at DMU. So that was a long time ago. So that was 2009.
No, even more than that. That was 2003.
Really? Wow.
2003. I graduated in 2005, and I think you were my first or second year lectures. So
good grief, even longer then.
We're talking a good 15, 18 years ago now, John.
Oh, geez. So if I'm 27 now, that means I must have been teaching, guest lecturing at DMU. I was about 6. Okay, that's fine.
Totally.
I feel totally happy now. I'm really happy.
Stick with that timeline, shall we?
I'm just writing that down. And since then, you've gone off and done that whole waste management, circular economy, helping people match products that are not needed anymore into containers and off to Africa and places like that. So we can talk about that maybe another time when we're focusing on that continent.
Yeah.
it led you to this industrial symbiosis, and I'm absolutely fascinated. And I know this is your favorite subject, and it's not a starter for 10 because you're going to go off and I'll be reining you back. So tell us in layman's terms, what is industrial symbiosis?
Yes. Well, first of all, I have to say thank you to you, because I think you were one of the people that set off that, do you know what, this is something I want to do. And I did design management because I knew I wanted to be in that sphere, but I think sustainability and care for the environment, I was just trying to find my niche. I was trying to find the thing that I could attach my energies to. Turned out it was industrial symbiosis, which is the worst mouthful ever. In layman's terms, what it is one man's waste is another man's treasure. It's that simple. And my role as a consultant or a practitioner in industrial symbiosis is to find those two people that need to work together. So the idea is that sustainability and circular economy are quite complex concepts, and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and RAP have done a lot of work to try and make it obtainable. But industrial symbiosis is one aspect of circular economy. And what I like about it is its simplicity, is the idea that when you make or use or produce something, you're going to have offcuts, waste, trimmings, byproducts. To you, that's waste. You don't need it. You don't want it. But if you could get that to somebody else, they could use it for something that they want to make or they want to create. And then it's not a waste, it's a resource. It's the beginning of the pipe, not the end of the pipe. But what you need to do is work out where all those people are and know what one person has and what one person wants in the amount and the type and the quantity and the information. And then basically be a matchmaker. And for 6 years, I had the best job in the world, which was traveling around the East Midlands. I was living in Leicester, being that matchmaker, talking to companies from all sectors and actually saying, you have this and you're throwing it away and you don't want it and it's a cost and it's something that you don't know what to do with. I have somebody who could utilize it and would want it. And actually buying something that you've thrown away makes massive economic business sense. You don't have to pay for its disposal, and the company who wants it can use that rather than buying something brand new. And in this industry of trying to reuse and recycle and renew, surely the easiest thing, rather than having a brand new virgin material into what you're making or doing, is to say, well, does it have to be brand new? Does it have to be virgin? Or could we actually use offcuts or bits or something from somebody else? So my job was literally to make those connections by having a very good address book of lots of companies and lots of people. And just one thing to mention is that what I really like about industrial symbiosis is also it's not sector specific. It's not like you can only do this for the textile industry, or you can only do this for construction, or you can only do this for plastics. You can switch across industries. So then if you have an industrial estate, like in the middle of Corby or Northampton or Brackmills or wherever it is, or an own little ecosystem like a university, you can start saying, well, why isn't that department talking to that department? Or why doesn't that company work with the same company that's on the same industrial estate, but they've never talked to each other? So that's industrial symbiosis as in its simplicity.
In a nutshell, I'm going to be using that when we're out of lockdown and I'm at a party. I'm going to say, does anybody want to know what industrial symbiosis is? I've heard from an expert, so that's good. So give me a practical example of it in action in, say, Mexico, or in what you did in Brazil. Let's focus on South America for the sake of this conversation.
Okay, so I'm just trying to think. So an example, I would probably say in Brazil, where we ran some workshops. So in Brazil, the problem is that a lot of it's still in its infancy in circular economy and kind of resource efficiency. And often businesses don't really speak to one another. So what we did is we set up industry workshops to invite all these different companies from different industries to come together and work. And what we did is we asked them all to give us a shopping list of all the things they had that they were trying to get rid of. And then also all the things they had that they would like to get. Now, it wasn't just materials. We took them to think about, say, well, maybe they need expertise in something, or maybe they have a warehouse that's half empty, or maybe they have a piece of equipment that they bought and never used. So we got 30 companies from Brazil, and in the Curitiba, which is a very industrial area, they have a lot of manufacturing capacities, and we invited lots of them and it was a free event, and said, just come and tell us all your haves and wants. And we did like a speed dating industry matching event for half a day. We put on food and we did some speaker slots, and it was translated. We gave it in English and it was translated into Portuguese. And we had some people who were businesses that had done work with us give some examples of where it had worked, and that kind of local case study affirmation is really valuable, rather than us coming from the outside in the UK telling them what to do. But what it meant was, after that day, we had about 350 potential matches where businesses said, you know what, I'll come and visit you, or do you know what, I'll come and see what you do. And what our test of a really good workshop is when at lunchtime, they all sit back and carry on the conversations we started. They don't all go off and look at their phones. They all pick up a sandwich and carry on talking. And those connections we make were brilliant. And it was and this was when, for Brazil, it was still a very new concept, and they all just got it and really embraced it.
I mean, from your perspective, I said you said you almost had a dream job for that period of time, because you're making these kind of connections. I mean, if you were to look at a hierarchy, and I don't necessarily mean it in a negative way, but I mean sort of, people that are adopting this industrial symbiosis at those early days. You said it was early then in Brazil. Is Brazil still the top of the tree when it comes to that adoption of that? And then who's next? Who's below them? Is it like, Venezuela, or you mentioned Ecuador? Is it going to be somewhere like Mexico?
Yeah, I think the thing is it's the funding of it. I think that's where the countries we've managed to really pilot this successfully, we did it very well in South Africa as well, was to have the funding or the government to support it, because there needs to be to pay for the time to give those relationships a go. So I think any country that's starting to switch on nationally to it being a potential, and I think that's why I mean, in my mind, I think Mexico would be ripe for industrial symbiosis projects. I know that it's starting to take flight in Peru, and I think there also needs to be the infrastructure and the businesses with the capabilities, because I think the problem with somewhere like Venezuela is I don't think they're at that evolutionary level to say, okay, how do we do this? I think they've got, and I said to someone in Mexico, why are you not doing more on waste and recycling? Because they only recycle 3% of their waste streams gets recycled in Mexico, which is astonishing. And they said, rather, we've got bigger issues. We've got education, and we've got corruption, and we've got healthcare. And unfortunately, sustainability is lower down the chain. So I think countries that are starting to move beyond some of those existential challenges are then ready to say, how can we do something more? But I do think you need the infrastructure, and the government want to do it. So that's why I think Brazil did very well, and Peru's ready, and maybe Argentina and Mexico and Puerto Rico and some of those other countries where the proximity is actually potential.
I mean, okay. Final question now, and I'll let you go. I know you've had a busy day, and I appreciate you talking to me on Friday afternoon. And maybe we can pick the conversation up again in the future at the next program, talking about Africa specifically, because I know you've done some amazing work there, particularly filling containers up and sending them over. So I think that's a separate conversation. But if you go back to your time at university and what you were learning and stuff, and meeting me, obviously wonderful external lecturers. How did you think your career was going to go, and how has it gone with something like, discovering industrial symbiosis and the circular economy, and obviously the opportunities that exist now with the way that the world is and the SDGs and stuff like that? I mean, is it a shock to you? Are you quite surprised about it, and are you shocked that more people don't know about it and could potentially work in it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's so much. I never knew that I was going down this track. I think I was always, I'm a child of the 70s, 80s. So I think recycling and the concept of bottle banks and everything kind of came into its own when I was a child. So I think it's been something that I was always very interested in. Culturally, I think having a father from India, there has always been a value of resources and a value of things. You know, I've been lucky enough to have that influence. So I think there was always going to be some element of my work that was always going to be about recycling, but I didn't really know that I could make a job out of it. And I think what's really exciting now with the circular economy is that they talk about blue and white collar jobs. Now they talk about green collar jobs. And if I'd had the opportunity to study at university, some of the courses that I'm now lecturing on that exist on sustainability, I learned everything the old fashioned way on the job. But I think what's really exciting is that people who have that passion now have a way to study it and really learn the technical background of it to really implement it. And I hope more people are aware of it. My only concern with sustainability is it's still seen as a niche thing that's separate to be studied. And actually, I fully believe circular economy and sustainability and industrial symbiosis should be ingrained into every topic of study. So it doesn't matter whether you're an accountant or an engineer or a caterer or a builder or doing an apprenticeship. I think sustainability should be something that's rippled through everything and not seen as a niche topic for people who are environmentalists, because I think we should all be environmentalists. So I'm amazed. I think I love to see that it's gathering more pace, but I do definitely feel that my concern is that if it doesn't get too sidelined as a niche topic, rather than saying this should be a systemic building block of anyone who's doing economics, business, management, hospitality, it should be in all of those topics.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because we often talk about journalists with inflammatory headlines, vermin and all this kind of stuff, and you turn around and say, well, journalists are trained to go out and meet people and all this, and if they're using those headlines, maybe we're not training them correctly. And then if you look at architects, they said in Germany, architects are trained to make all doors wider. So they're not disability perspective, accessibility. It's about access for everybody, no matter what your access issues. It goes back to that kind of education. And that's what you're saying, really, isn't it? Rather than a subject you study specifically, it's an element of everything that people should do. I guess that leads me to my final question, really. We briefly focused on South America there, and you've mentioned a couple of countries and where they are adopting it and opportunities and stuff. I mean, from a UK perspective, are we even scratching the surface of where we could be doing? I mean, I know you've done stuff with, like I said before, containers to Africa and stuff, but from a UK perspective, are we anywhere near what we should be doing before we start looking at other places?
We have a long way to go.
That was a very politically correct answer.
We need to do it in the next 5 years. That's what's really scary. We have a lot. It's totally doable, but the concern is that at the moment with climate change and the targets that have been set, if we don't start making sizable differences in the next 5 years, when COP26, which is in November, when they're re-establishing our targets for the next 5 years, after that 5-year period, after 2025, if we haven't got our house in order now, the targets have already been stated that would be so astronomically tough to do that we're immediately bound to fail, whereas at the moment it is achievable. So I think the UK has a lot to work on. If we look over our shoulder at countries like Mexico and countries in South America, we're further down the journey than they are. But if we look ahead to countries like France and Germany and Italy, they are way ahead of us. So it's all trajectories on a way. And even France and other countries that are doing a lot more on the circular economy, they are still having to push so hard to make changes. So we're getting there, but we have to do a lot more, a lot sooner. But what's great for other countries is to see we're all learning. We're looking at France and Germany and saying, what have they learned and what can we learn so we don't waste time making mistakes? And hopefully other countries, such as in South America and Latin America, that can see what we've learned and say, well, actually, we can see that that's a good footprint or a good blueprint for us to follow. But then at the same time, you have different cultural, social, infrastructural challenges. Whereas for us to look at France and Germany, it's a lot of a closer parallel.
Yeah. And is it business will, or is it political will, or is it a combination of both? And is it funding? Is it taking the media on that journey as well of the value of doing it?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting because everyone's looking at someone else to start the campaign.
Yeah,
you know, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think the problem is the consumers say we will buy it if you sell it, and the manufacturers are saying no one's asking for it, and the government saying business won't support it. So everyone's looking at everyone else as a reason not to do something. I think the government has to lead the charge, because until there are tax incentives or legislative reasons, like it's stick and carrot, until you can make it feasible for a company to justify changing, a lot of them won't. But at the same time, consumers need to say we're not accepting this. You know, there's been a big change about palm oil through social media, education, textiles sector, waste electrical sector. There's a lot more that can be done, but I think we're all a bit apathetic and none of us really want to change the way we live our lives. And the thing with circular economy is that surely we can all make small changes, and but it shouldn't be that you take a sustainable option. It should be that all options are sustainable.
Yeah,
and that's my bugbear.
That's the t-shirt. That's the t-shirt. All options should be sustainable, not a sustainable option.
It shouldn't be that these are the mainstream options, and if you're an environmentalist, here's the environmental sustainability one that's probably a bit grey and a bit more funky to keep you happy. It should be that the mainstream options are sustainable.
Yeah, I guess that's the thing, isn't it? From a media perspective, it's all like, you know, if you're interested in that, if you recycle and use your orange bag, or you're a vegan, or that kind of, you know, it's the othering, isn't it? Rather than we'll actually make it something that's an option for everybody.
And make it a no-brainer. I think the problem is with sustainability at the moment, it's still quite an expensive option. So I always say, like, you know, what's doable for somebody who's upper middle class single versus someone who's on benefit with 2 children and kind of a limited and lives in a 1-bedroom flat in Peckham is a very different scenario. You know, it has to be, does it work from a demographic point of view? And I think at the moment it's still seen as something niche, and it's still seen as something as optional, but we've got 5 years to sort this out. So it needs to be just the obvious, not the optional.
My final question.
It's okay.
I think I've asked you about 4 final questions.
It's fine.
When you're teaching, like you were today, guest lecturing on and let's assume it's normal times and there's all the faces in the room, but you're doing it on Zoom at the moment. Are you playing to a responsive crowd, do you think? Do you think there's a willingness there amongst student bodies now and all that? Now you're saying things to them that are obvious and that they're up for, as opposed to anything that's kind of radical or different?
Yeah, I think we're definitely pushing at an open door now. I think when I first started in industrial symbiosis, you know, 10 years ago, you were having to do that advocacy. You were having to set the reason why this matters. Now I think people know why it matters. I think what people are more interested in now is, well, what can I do? How do I make the change? So I think part of that story's already been done.
Yeah.
But I think students are receptive. I think what it's hard for them, and what I hope to try and give them, is what can they do about it? What skills or tools can they do to make the change? Because I think the problem with things sometimes like these global climate change is people are like, well, what can I do about it, and how can I make an impact? And is it really possible when the government doesn't do this and industry doesn't do that? But I think it's people like students and designers that I'm talking to is feeling that they have a part to play.
Radha, lovely. Thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate it. I know you're a busy person, and I'd like to think this is one of many. It could be the Radha and John series. I think
there you go.
I think people would listen in, and maybe we'll bring some change to the world together. But I appreciate you taking the time to do that.
It's a pleasure. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks, John.
Thanks.